This reading is from the Key to Theosophy, the difference between theosophy and spiritualism. We assert that the divine spark in man, being one and identical in its essence with the universal spirit, or our spiritual self, is practically omniscient, but that it cannot manifest its knowledge owing to the impediments of matter. Now, the more these impediments are removed, in other words, the more the physical body is paralyzed as to its own independent activity and consciousness, as in deep sleep or deep trance, or again in illness, the more fully can the inner self manifest on this plane. This is our explanation of those truly wonderful phenomena of a higher order, in which undeniable intelligence and knowledge are exhibited. As to the lower order of manifestations, such as the physical phenomena and the platitudes and common talk of the general spirit, to explain even the most important of the teachings we hold upon the subject, we would take up more space and time than can be allotted to it at present. We have no desire to interfere with the belief of the spiritualists any more than with any other belief. The onus probandi must fall on the believers in spirits. And at the present moment, while still convinced that the higher sort of manifestations occur through the disembodied souls, their leaders and the most learned and intelligent among the spiritualists are the first to confess that not all the phenomena are produced by spirits. Gradually, they will come to recognize the whole truth, but meanwhile, we have no right nor desire to proselytize them to our views. Less so as in the cases of purely psychic and spiritual manifestations, we believe in the intercommunication of the spirit of the living man with that of disembodied personalities. We say that in such cases it is not the spirits of the dead who descend on earth, but the spirits of the living that ascend to the pure spiritual souls. In truth, there is neither ascending nor descending, but a change of state or condition for the medium. The body of the latter, becoming paralyzed or entranced, the spiritual ego is free from its trammels and finds itself on the same plane of consciousness with the disembodied spirits. Hence, if there is any spiritual attraction between the two, they can communicate, as often occurs in dreams. The difference between a mediumistic and a non-sensitive nature is this. The liberated spirit of a medium has the opportunity and facility of influencing the passive organs of its entranced physical body to make them act, speak, and write at its will. The ego can make it repeat, echo-like, and in the human language, the thoughts and ideas of the disembodied entity as well as its own. But the non-receptive or non-sensitive organism of one who is very positive cannot be so influenced. Hence, although there is hardly a human being whose ego does not hold free intercourse during the sleep of his body with those whom it loved and lost, yet on account of the positiveness and non-receptivity of its physical envelope and brain, no recollection or a very dim, dream-like remembrance lingers in the memory of the person once awake.
Elena Petrovna Blavatsky. How do we characterize her life in a few words? We can't. She was truly a remarkable person, and still is in another form, not in her current body, but her body that we knew her as. She was born in Russia, Ekaterinopol, Ukraine, Russia. According to the Russian calendar, August 11/12, midnight, August 11, 1831. The Julian calendar would be July 31st, around 1:42 a.m. She was born during a cholera epidemic, premature, They thought she wasn't going to make it, so they christened her, etc. At that time. The events of her life were one after another. Her father, first she was born of royalty. She is known as a Russian noblewoman. This student calls her a Russian American noblewoman because she did become an American citizen. Father being a captain in the army, her mother being a very renowned person of her own right. Her grandfather being also, he was a counselor to the Tsar. Her grandmother was a Princess Helena Petrovna, same name as hers. And her great-grandfather was a student of alchemy, magic, and a Kabbalist, and he had an extensive library, and she would often be seen in her teen years, etc., in that library, absorbing all of his books. She traveled extensively from her birth to the first 20 years of life, at 19 years or so. Got to be very well known because she knew how to do things most of us don't know how to do. She saw things most of us don't see. We're going to fast forward ahead to 1850 when she was in London. She met her master, Moya, and in Hyde Park there in London, and he gave her at that time a preview of the future mission of her work. 1852 she traveled to Canada where she got robbed of her property. Then she went to the United States and traveled all over the U.S. and South America, wagon train to the West, etc. Very unusual for a woman of her day. Fast forwarding ahead to around 1860 to 62, she traveled with her sister Vera to the holy city of Zenonsk, which was on the Don River in Russia, and her feats had already become very well known at that time. And one of the people there said that she can help humanity if she uses her powers with discretion. Well, at that time, she was getting full control of her powers around the 1860-63 time frame. In fact, 1863 to 65, her whereabouts were really uncertain. Some people say that she was in Tibet studying under her master Moya. She wrote in around 1865 time frame, "I have lived with the whirling dervishes, with the Druzes of Mount Lebanon, and with the Bedouin Arabs and the Marabouts of Damascus." So she herself recognized that she had been around quite a bit, which she really had been. You could just look at the chronology and tell that. And then writing of herself in 1882, looking back to this time period when she had disappeared from 1863 to 1865, she stated, "Between the Blavatsky of 1845 and 1865 and the Blavatsky of 1865 to 1882, there is an unbridgeable gulf." Looking ahead to 1867, she found herself in Italy, fighting by the Garibaldins for Italy's freedom. She was wounded 5 times and left for dead. She returned to Tibet in 1868-1869 time frame to learn from her master, and she was also worked with Master Humi, who later became known by that name later on. And she in 1870 she traveled again Europe, Yemen, Egypt, around that area, and her public life is kind of marked at 1871. She at that time was sailing south, was involved in a shipwreck when there was an explosion of ammunition on the ship and blew it up. She survived that. Went to Alexandria, Egypt, lived over there a couple of months. She took up the mediumship, working with them, trying to work in that area. She found that there was a lot of dishonesty and fraud among mediums, so she sort of moved away from that idea. She met Mrs. Emma Coulomb, who she helped with a job later on, and that was a very difficult situation that she got into later on. But anyway, moving on to 1873, she received an order from her master to go to the United States. So July 1873 finds her in New York City without money. She had given up her first class passage on the ship to a lady who had children and had been cheated out of her passage by being sold a bogus ticket. So she made a living selling artificial flowers and using her artistic talents to get by. She later got an inheritance of about 1,000 rubles from her father's estate, a start of his inheritance, but that turned out to be an unsuccessful real estate venture. So the bottom line is she had real life problems just like you and I do, financial, etc. But she managed to move on and become who she became anyway. In 1874, she heard about some things happening at Eddy Farm and met Colonel Olcott through that process. The mediums, etc., things were going on there, which attracted their attention. But she found out that there was not much to that, and she exposed the fraud that was going on, and went on to, wrote an article about mediums and their practice for money and being not a good thing. In 1875, Mr. Judge, who had just lost his daughter, was interested in trying to contact her, contacted Colonel Olcott, who got him in contact with HPB. They met at 46 Irving Place, which is where she lived at the time. I'm not sure what the situation was there, but certainly I don't think today you're going to find that's going to be an upper-class neighborhood. It's in Brooklyn, and so anyway, they met there. Later on, she wrote him "Yours till death and after" HPB. Later on, Mr. Judge, and it was in the esoteric she in her memorial said, "It was her eye that attracted me, the eye of one whom I must have known in lives long passed away. She looked at me in recognition at that first hour, and never since has that look changed." So it seems like they obviously knew each other in prior lives, and they got together to establish the Theosophical Society, as we're going to get to next, and tried to help us see the truth through their publications, their talks, etc. Okay, moving on in 1875, Mr. Judge and Miss Olcott were at a lecture, and she passed a note and she gave it to Mr. Judge, to Mr. Olcott, to form a Theosophical Society. She was doing this in response to a request by her masters. They all agreed to do it, and September to November they spent forming the society, the legal aspects, etc. And the three objects that were adopted by the society were very much what the three objects are in the Theosophical movement today. one to form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, color, as the first speaker indicated. Second is to promote the Aryan and other scriptures of the world's religions and sciences and to vindicate the importance of the old Asiatic literature, namely the Brahmatical, the Buddhist, and the Zoroastrian philosophies. The words have been slightly changed since then, but they're almost exactly the same. Third, to investigate the hidden mysteries of nature under every aspect possible and the psychic and spiritual powers latent in man, especially, very much like they are now. There was in the origin and plan and the prospectus that was gotten together in forming the TS, there were words to the effect that these are the quotes, as the highest development physically and spiritually on earth of the creative cause, man should aim to solve the mystery of his being. He is the procreator of his species, physically, and having inherited the nature of the unknown but palpable cause of his own creation, must possess in his inner physical self this creative power in lesser degree. And there's another quote,